Whew. Are we live? Are we live? I think we're live. I'm going to give it a few seconds here. Got a big show today. Got up early, hit the mainstream news real hard this morning. Got a lot of good news, bad news, a lot of questions, more unanswered questions than answers, of course, at this point in time. But this, my friends, is Wake Up Wyoming with me, your friend, the Max Mogren, reporting live for you from beautiful Alpine, Wyoming. It's March 28th, 2020. Right now, I just ran up the stairs with a fresh cup of coffee. Again, I've been hitting the books or hitting the news since real early this morning. Let's take a couple deep breaths together, shall we? We can try to stay informed, but it's very easy to get overwhelmed with all the bad news out there, all the uncertainty, all the fear, all the economic crisis, the COVID itself. Of course, the biggest news in the world is the COVID, but we seem to have some good news here today. This Asia Times you see up on the screen already, why France is hiding a cheap and tested virus cure. We're going to get into that. But first, I want to take a look at the overall COVID numbers here. Globally, let's refresh this because it changes all the time. If you're here, if you're live with me, let me know where you're coming from. I don't see any comments yet. I don't see any viewers. Oh, we got 100 viewers. Good morning. 618,043 total confirmed cases worldwide, 28,823 deaths. You can see here the rate of increase keeps going up. We're being told this is a crisis of unprecedented proportions. But let's take a second step back from the fear porn and look at the statistics here from DoSomething.org. 11 facts about global poverty. And these statistics, it's hard to trust any statistics. Again, we got to take everything with a grain of salt, including this broadcast, right? I'm just one guy trying to make sense of the world with the mainstream media, which we know lies, can't be trusted. We know governments lie. We even know that the healthcare industry is a profit-driven cartel with a monopoly on healthcare. But here at DoSomething.org, you can see most of their statistics are coming from the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and so forth. 1 billion children worldwide are living in poverty. According to UNICEF, 22,000 children die each day due to poverty. 805 million people worldwide do not have enough food to eat. More than 750 million people lack adequate access to clean drinking water. Diarrhea caused by inadequate drinking water, sanitation, and hand hygiene kills an estimated 842,000 people every year globally, or approximately 2,300 people per day. Preventable diseases like diarrhea and pneumonia take the lives of 2 million children a year who are too poor to afford proper treatment. 80% of the world population lives on less than $10 a day, and if the global economy keeps crashing, I would venture to guess that number is going to increase. Oxfam estimates that it would take $60 billion annually to end extreme global poverty. That's less than 1/4 of the income of the top 100 richest billionaires. And the World Food Program says the poor are hungry and their hunger traps them in poverty. Hunger is the #1 cause of death in the world, killing more people than HIV, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. So total global COVID deaths approaching 30,000, but I think it's important to note that approximately 2,300 people die per day due to inadequate drinking water, sanitation, and hand hygiene, and approximately 22,000 children die each day due to poverty. Okay, this COVID situation, obviously those statistics, very depressing, very heartening or disheartening. Whoa. And published yesterday by ABC News, the coronavirus pandemic compounds dire situation for poor Americans and poor people worldwide. About 140 million people couldn't afford a $400 economic crisis before COVID-19. Now tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans laid off. Mainstream perpetually putting out fear porn. I'm going to get to this France one in a second, but it's important to note Medical news today, published yesterday, is the anti-flu drug Avajon effective in treating COVID-19? An experimental new study has recently tested the efficacy of Avajon for treating COVID-19. Okay. I had Jeff Brines on the show the other day. He clued me into this. Some suppliers for a company he works for in China said the Chinese were treating COVID with Avajon with great success. Fortune published, what is today, the 28th? Yeah, so published today, Fortune magazine. Fujifilm antiviral drug emerges as a promising underdog in the coronavirus treatment race. So the news is out there in the mainstream. The Guardian reported on this on Wednesday, March 18th. Japanese flu drug clearly effective in treating coronavirus, says China. Good news. Looking at the Fujifilm stock price, you can see in the last month, on the day that article came out in the Guardian, they had a huge spike in their share price from $40 a share to $56 before dropping back down to the mid 40s. We'll see what happens with Fortune and other magazines talking about Avajon. Straight from here, Japan Times, February 22nd. So I just want to point out that people have known about this for more than a month. This article from the Japan Times published on February 22nd, 2020. So this thing's been on the radar, but we haven't heard too much about it in the US. This from Fujifilm itself, the company with the patent on Avajon, published on March 27th, 2020, so yesterday. The Avajon tablet was approved for manufacture and sale in Japan in 2014 as an influenza antiviral drug. The drug is to be considered for use only when there is an outbreak of novel or re-emerging influenza virus infections in which other influenza antiviral drugs are either not effective or insufficiently effective, and the Japanese government decides to use the drug as a countermeasure against such influenza viruses. Thus, while the Japanese government has a certain stockpile of the drug has never been distributed in the market and is not available at hospitals and pharmacies in Japan or overseas. Favipiravir, the active pharmaceutical ingredient in the Avajon tablet, has a mechanism that prevents the propagation of viruses. The drug may potentially have an antiviral effect on the novel coronavirus, which is classified into the same type, single-stranded RNA virus or influenza virus. However, at this stage, clinical application of the Avajon tablet to the coronavirus disease is under study and preparation in order to obtain clear evidence of the drug's efficacy and safety on the novel coronavirus. The Avajon tablet has not been approved for marketing in any countries other than Japan. If the government or regulatory authorities in the countries decide to use the use of the drug, Fujifilm Group intends to cooperate sincerely with the supply of the drug to such countries in consultation and coordination with the Japanese government. So that was published yesterday by Fujifilm itself. Here in the US, New York hospitals treating coronavirus patients with vitamin C. High doses of vitamin C appear to be effective as well. Staying healthy. Interesting news here out of France. This was published today by Pepe Escobar over at Asia Times, and he is accusing the French government of hiding a cheap and tested cure for COVID, other viruses as well. Wow. Important to note that before this COVID pandemic, before there was this global lockdown, all these draconian laws from governments, we had a huge public uprising in France. It's apparently still going on despite the quarantine, despite stay-in-place orders by the French government, despite requiring people to have a document in order to go out on the streets. We have big protests in Hong Kong, big protests in Iran, big protests all over the world now. How conveniently the COVID pandemic, some call it the plandemic, has effectively shut down protest and people's ability to congregate in groups outside the internet worldwide. But let's get into this. I'm going to copy and paste this one into the comments. I think everybody, please share this video. Also, If you feel so inclined, share this link, because I think it's important that we get this information out. I'm trying to add a comment there. It's not going to let me, but you can see asiatimes.com. If you go to their website, you'll find it. What's going on in the fifth largest economy in the world arguably points to a major collusion scandal in which the French government is helping Big Pharma to profit from the expansion of COVID-19. Informed French citizens are absolutely furious about it. My initial question to a serious, unimpeachable Paris source, jurist Valérie Bugeaud, was about the liaisons dangereuses between Macronism and Big Pharma, and especially about the mysterious disappearance, more likely outright theft, of all the stocks of chloroquine in possession of the French government. So here they're talking about a different drug that allegedly, apparently, has efficacy in fighting COVID. Respected Professor Christian Perron talked about the theft live in one of France's 24/7 info channels. The Central Pharmacy for the Hospitals announced today that they were facing a total rupture of stocks, that they were pillaged. Putting that in plain English, the stock of chloroquine in France has been stolen. This article goes on and on. Looks like some shady business. This guy, this French professor, Didier Raoult, professor and biologist, professor of microbiology, specializes in infectious diseases and is the director of the IHU Mediterranean Infection Institute, posing in his office in Marseille, France. Didier Raoult, French professor, was part of a clinical trial in which hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin healed 90% of COVID-19 cases if they were tested very early. Early massive testing is at the heart of the successful South Korean strategy. Raoult is opposed to the total lockdown of sane individuals and possible carriers, which he considers medieval in an anachronistic sense. He's in favor of massive testing, which, besides South Korea, was successful in Singapore, Taiwan, and Vietnam, and a fast treatment with hydroxychloroquine. Only contaminated individuals should be confined, according to French biologist and professor of microbiology Didier Raoult. Chloroquine costs €1 for 10 pills, and there's a rub. Big Pharma, which crucially finances INSERM, a French health authority, opposed to this drug apparently, and includes national champion Sanofi, would rather go for a way more profitable solution. Sanofi, for the moment, says it is actively preparing to produce chloroquine, but that may take weeks, and there's no mention about pricing. Interestingly, on January 13, Agnes Buzyn, still France's health minister, classified chloroquine as a poisonous substance, from now on only available by prescription, an astonishing move considering that it has been sold off the shelf in France for half a century. On March 16th, the Macron government ordered a partial shutdown. There wasn't a peep about chloroquine. Police initially were not required to wear masks. Most have been stolen anyway, and there are not enough masks even for health workers. In 2011, France had nearly 1.5 billion masks, 800 million surgical masks, and 600 million masks for health professionals generally. But then over the years, the strategic stocks of masks were not renewed to please the EU and to apply the Maastricht criteria, which limited membership in the Growth and Stability Pact to countries whose budget deficits did not exceed 3% of GDP. One of those in charge at the time was Jerome Solomon, now a scientific counselor to the Macron government. So France used to have a whole lot of masks. That's one question that strikes me as odd here in the US as well. How are all these hospitals, these multi-billion-dollar healthcare providers that profit handsomely every year, not prepared for the initial 2 weeks of a so-called pandemic? It strikes me as a little odd that the biggest news is how short healthcare providers are on masks when, according to this article, for example, in France, they had 1.5 billion masks stockpiled, but they let those stockpiles diminish. Interesting. Coming from Natural Blaze, they're saying good news about the pandemic. Options for preventing virus deaths now reports on world-renowned French immunologist Didier Raoult, who reported a 100% cure in 40 patients when using hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin. While we certainly hope this is true on a wider scale, it's also being reported by the New York Post that some New York hospitals are finding success with intravenous vitamin C. The most vulnerable die first by Dr. Mark Sirkus confirms the use of vitamin C in combating COVID-19. Dr. Sirkus points out, the coronavirus outbreak is not the Black Plague, but the world is reacting as if it were. Many people are dying of flu as usual this time of year, and as usual, coronavirus show up in 10 to 14% of these patients each and every year. The coronavirus is said to be more lethal than the regular flu, even though so much is unknown about the virus. Health officials decided even before it showed up that they would close the world and suicide the world economy rather than let nature take her course. A major source of information upon which government leaders have relied to urge or order the canceling of public events, shutdown of businesses, and sheltering in place has proved to be inaccurate. Professor Jihad Bishara, a leading Israeli virologist, said people were being whipped into unnecessary panic. The virus is not airborne. Most people who are infected will recover without even knowing they were sick. The at-risk groups are now known. The global pandemic is unnecessary and exaggerated. Other news out of the UK, which is also here, but you can find it all over the website of the British government on March 22nd, reported that COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high consequence infectious disease, yet the lockdowns continue. I had an interesting video I posted yesterday. It's a great cartoon in the midst of this. David Icke, conspiracy theorist David Icke, has been very prolific in the wake of this situation, talking about the Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution, politics. Here you can see the little globalist band leader carrying the COVID wand there, whipping the world into a frenzy, and the proposed solution is global tyranny, economic collapse on a scale never before seen. Not pretty, not pretty. I'm going to leave that one open. Interestingly, in the midst of this whole crisis, updated 14 hours ago from Reuters, the big news in the US, what do they want you to do? They want you to be afraid to go anywhere near people. They want you to be afraid to pump gas. They want you to be afraid to leave your home. They want us to be afraid of food shortages and all that. And in the midst of this, what is the proposed solution? Well, we're just going to have to make a whole bunch of these ventilators, which prompts a few questions for me. Notably, why is there no talk whatsoever about supplemental oxygen tanks in the midst of this? As far as I'm aware, coronavirus does not shut down people's ability to respirate, right? To breathe in and out, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. If you can find any information out there that says coronavirus makes it impossible for people to engage in the basic act of breathing, I can understand how coronavirus diminishes lung function, as does pneumonia, bronchitis, the regular old flu, and countless other medical conditions. But in the midst of all this talk about ventilators, I personally am curious, and this is my opinion, I'm curious why there's no talk about supplemental oxygen tanks, right? In the midst of this crisis, where coast to coast, thousands, hundreds of thousands perhaps, of businesses that use tanks, whether they be bars with brew gas or you name it, there's literally millions of oxygen tanks or tanks used to store compressed gases all over this country. Why is there all this talk about mechanical ventilators and no talk whatsoever about the possibility of helping critical COVID patients by hooking them up to supplemental oxygen? Because as far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, drop it in the comments there, I've seen no evidence that the coronavirus prohibits people from engaging in the act of attempting to breathe. Yes, it diminishes lung function, and that's where supplemental oxygen could be very effective, in my opinion. What else do we got here? Here locally, published by Buckrail, our local news source, the town of Jackson is prepared to close its borders if the state doesn't do it first. Here locally, like a lot of the world, they've closed down the economy. They're now talking about closing down all the hotels and basically quarantining the entire town. They've closed the national parks, and they're even talking about trying to limit people's access to the national forests, right? Out here in Wyoming, well, all over the world, people need to get out into nature to exercise. People need to get out into nature to reconnect, to escape from the electromagnetic soup that we have been subjected to by modern technologies like smartphones, Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, 5G, smart meters. The list goes on. And here there's a big push to close access to the backcountry, close access to the national forests. I have to say to anybody locally watching, if you're going out in big groups like this, you're screwing it up for everybody else. This whole situation may very well be a well-orchestrated pile of bullshit, but your own personal bullshit contributes to the pile. So, social distancing, we're being asked to do it. And if you're going out in a group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, hiking in close proximity right next to the highway, that's going to piss off a lot of people who are living out of fear right now. Interestingly, I thought this was interesting to see. This was published by Facebook itself 2 days ago. Obviously, this could be an old image, but in a time when all Americans and really people all over the world are being told to quarantine themselves and socially distance, a picture of a bunch of healthcare professionals snuggling with no gloves on is probably not the best image to be putting out there. Facebook. Interestingly, you go in the comments here, it's all thank you so much, thank you so much. Don't see a comment about why is Facebook showing these people hugging in a hospital, all these healthcare providers hugging, standing on one on top of each other at a time when the rest of the planet is being told to socially distance. Again, it's not a time for practical jokes. A doctor was arrested after being accused of deliberately coughing on nurses. Similar situation, according to USA Today, reported yesterday, where a woman went into a grocery store and was deliberately coughing on the food, which resulted in $35,000 worth of food being thrown away by the store. Probably not a good time to be cracking jokes like that, my friends, regardless of what the overall situation actually is. In the midst of, excuse me, oof, need a little coffee. Of course, we've already covered in this show today how hunger and pollution and poverty kill tens of thousands of people every day. Total COVID deaths worldwide approaching 30,000, which is arguably the number of preventable deaths attributed to poverty, pollution, and other preventable, very easily preventable public health fiascos on the reggie daily. And in the midst of this COVID situation, published 2 days ago, the EPA has suspended enforcement of environmental laws amid coronavirus. The EPA issued a sweeping suspension of its enforcement of environmental laws Thursday, telling companies they would not need to meet environmental standards during the coronavirus outbreak. Let's file this one under WTF. The temporary policy for which the EPA has set no end date would allow any number of industries to skirt environmental laws, with the agency saying it will not seek penalties for noncompliance with routine monitoring and reporting obligations. Cynthia Giles, head of the EPA's Office of Enforcement during the Obama administration, called it a moratorium on enforcing the nation's environmental laws and an abdication of the agency's duty. This EPA statement is essentially a nationwide waiver of environmental rules for the indefinite future. It tells companies across the country that they will not face enforcement even if they emit unlawful air and water pollution in violation of environmental laws, so long as they claim that those failures are in some way caused by the virus pandemic. And it allows them an out on monitoring too. So we may never know how bad the violating pollution was, she wrote in a statement to The Hill. I can't even make this stuff up. Can't even make it up. I think it's important that we all remain aware too in the midst of this, that the same governments who shut down the Occupy Wall Street protest movement, the same governments who shut down the Standing Rock protest encampment, the peaceful prayer encampment run by the Native Americans in North Dakota, where they were protesting to stop the pollution of pipelines, the pollution of fracking. Peaceful prayer encampment used to, with intent to protect the Native Americans' water supply. What was the government's response to that? Well, they lied about it a whole bunch. They sprayed people with water cannons on sub-freezing evenings. They shot people with rubber bullets. They shot tear gas. And I was there personally and witnessed the federal government sending hundreds of militarized police, helicopters, Humvees, armored personnel carriers, and the like, come in and bulldoze a peaceful prayer encampment. So it's pretty hard to take the government's response to COVID seriously when you look at their track record. Of course, I think we can't forget 9/11 either. Never forget 9/11, when the United States government killed 3,000 of its own citizens in a staged false flag attack, which was blamed on Osama bin Laden so they could invade Afghanistan and regain control of the world's opium supply. Okay, the United States government is not only the world's largest arms dealer, it's also the world's largest drug dealer and the world's largest terrorist organization. And it appears to be terrorizing the vast majority of Americans very, very effectively right now. So I encourage everybody out there, stay awake, stay aware, stay informed, and please share this. Please share this video. I'm trying to get the word out. We know it's going to be censored. We know it's going to be suppressed. I'm citing mainstream sources. I'm trying to help people be informed, but Facebook's not going to let this go viral. Apparently, if you want people to really watch, you could start a watch party, which is a Facebook feature there. Start a watch party, invite a bunch of your friends, and that helps live streams like this reach a wider audience. In the midst of COVID, another thing that kind of just boggles the mind with the absurdity of it all. In the midst of COVID, the U.S. home healthcare industry warns of possible collapse. Of course, at a time like this, when the vast majority of people are being quarantined, being told to stay at home, it seems that a great way to combat the spread of infectious diseases would be to keep infected people at home. And in the midst of this, apparently, home healthcare industry is possibly collapsing. I don't even understand how that happens, but I bet you they're going to get a big bailout, and like conventional hospitals, $100 billion bailout to conventional hospitals. Boggles the mind, the whole situation. Interestingly, in the midst of all this, one person who has profited handsomely is the owner of the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos. Just so you know, the coronavirus has been reported at 13 of Amazon's U.S. warehouses. Jeff Bezos, multi-billionaire, the so-called richest man on the planet, which is not true. Yes, he's very, very wealthy. But I can't stress this enough. Jeff Bezos has ran the world's largest online retailer, for a couple decades here. Contrast that with the elite families who have controlled the global financial system for 500 years. I would venture to guess that the people who literally loan all of the money, all of the currency, all of the debt-based, fiat, centrally controlled, private, profit-driven money that we are all living under, the most ubiquitous and absurd conspiracy of all, I would venture to guess that those people have accumulated considerably more money than Jeff Bezos. But the point of this little rant is that Bezos was asking the American people to pony up and donate to support his workers. And he put in $1 million of his own money, which is basically the equivalent to him reaching in his pocket, pulling out a little bit of change and throwing it towards the cause. Coming from theguardian.com, published 2 days ago, coronavirus measures could cause global food shortage, the UN warns. Let's talk about food. A lot of people hoarding, a lot of people stockpiling in the midst of this crisis. But let's get into that aspect of it a little bit. Protectionist measures by national governments during the coronavirus crisis could provoke food shortages around the world, the UN's food body has warned. Harvests have been good and the outlook for stable crops is promising, but a shortage of field workers brought on by the virus crisis and a move towards protectionism, tariffs and export bans, means problems could quickly appear in the coming weeks. Maximo Torrero, chief economist of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, told The Guardian. Again, take everything I say, everything the mainstream media says, and especially everything the UN says with a hearty pinch of salt. The worst that can happen, blah, blah, blah. You get the point. Governments must resist calls by some quarters to protect their own food supply by restricting exports, he said, as some have begun to do so. Kazakhstan, for instance, by the way, very large country, very large, I think 5th largest on the planet, according to a report from Bloomberg, has banned exports of wheat flour, of which it is one of the world's biggest sources, as well as restrictions on buckwheat and vegetables, including onions, carrots, and potatoes. Vietnam, the world's 3rd biggest rice exporter, has temporarily suspended rice export contracts. Russia, the world's biggest wheat exporter, may also threaten to restrict exports, as it has done before, and the position of the U.S. is in doubt given Donald Trump's eagerness for a trade war in other commodities. So the Guardian and the UN spreading quite a bit of fear porn. But what are they telling people to do? Individuals can also play an important role by avoiding panic buying and hoarding of food and cutting down on food waste. Buying too much fresh farm produce that then goes off before it can be eaten will just exacerbate food supply problems, he said. Individuals should only buy what they need to avoid food waste. So on one hand, the mainstream, the UN is telling us there's probably going to be, widespread food shortages, but don't do anything personally because you're just making it worse. Of course, as we started the show off today, we have to be aware that poverty and hunger and the lack of access to basic sanitation and clean drinking water kills tens of thousands of people per day. Arguably, more people will die today due to lack of access to healthy food, clean water, basic sanitation, and other very easily preventable situations than have died since the coronavirus started making its way around the world. Coming out of the UK, a couple days ago, food rationing could be on its way unless everyone stops panic buying. Coming out of Japan, there's a plea in the Asahi Shimbun, a plea to stop food hoarding as food stocks are secured, published yesterday. And out of Reuters, I think it's important to note, my opinion in this situation, the cure being proposed by these absurdly corrupt and power-hungry governments is worse than the disease itself. Yes, coronavirus is serious. Yes, people are dying. But again, more people die per day due to poverty, lack of access to clean food, healthy food, clean water, and such than have died from the coronavirus since it started. Here in the U.S., most of us not worried about starving to death, but tens of millions face losing jobs in the escalating coronavirus crisis. No big surprise there. Our friends to the south of the border, coming from Wolf Street, published yesterday, Latin America was already steeped in economic problems. Now come the external and internal shocks of COVID-19. Not even Brazil and Mexico have the fiscal and monetary leeway to offset those shocks. If the virus spreads across Latin America with the same virulence as it has done in Europe, the US, and large parts of Asia, the results could be disastrous. The region's cash-strapped government simply cannot afford to provide sort of financial support programs being rolled out in more advanced economies. Even if they could, the measures would not apply to the untold millions of workers eking out a living in the informal economy, most of whom could not afford to miss a day or two of work. Coming from antiwar.com, a little bit of news outside of the COVID situation. If you're familiar with the situation in Venezuela, they've been subjected to severe sanctions. Of course, oil price dropped to recent record lows recently, so that's going to dry up their revenue from oil. And this guy Guaido was basically put into power by the U.S. Only 3% of Venezuelans say he is their president. The latest poll out of Venezuela from early March shows that U.S.-backed Juan Guaido is not considered the nation's president by hardly anybody in the country. With a 3% margin of error, only 3% identified Guaido as president. After over a year of the U.S. harping on about him being the legitimate president, 71% of Venezuelans identified President Maduro as the president. He's the one who won the last election, and this comes despite the U.S. having just put a $15 million bounty on him. 23.7% also said that no one was really president at this point. Again, well ahead of Guaido. Even people saying, I don't know, were 2.2%, putting them neck and neck with Guaido. Clearly, he doesn't have deep support in this poll. Pretty wild, pretty wild. Coming from Sweden, important to note, Sweden is one of the few countries that has not completely submitted to this global fear campaign surrounding the coronavirus pandemic. My last name, Mogren, that's the Americanized bastardization of a Swedish name, which apparently is pronounced Mogren, which maybe I should go by that. Mogren, a nice name. So I'm pretty Swedish. Maybe that's why I'm not buying into the hype like Sweden. But Sweden has bucked the global trend with experimental virus strategy published 4 days ago. Sweden has become an international outlier in its response to the deadly coronavirus outbreak by keeping schools open and adopting few other restrictions, as the Scandinavian nation embarks on what one health expert called a huge experiment. Since the UK went into lockdown on Monday evening, Sweden is the largest European country with the fewest limits on where people can go and what they can do. Schools for children up to the age of 16 remain open. Many people continue to go to work, and packed commuter trains and buses were reported this week in the capital, Stockholm. Clearly, Sweden stands out at the moment, said Carl Bildt, the former prime minister. Swedish authorities have banned public gatherings of more than 500 people, closed universities and higher education colleges, and advised workers to stay at home if possible. Authorities on Tuesday ordered restaurants and bars only to serve people at tables rather than at the bar. Local media have been full of stories of thousands of people gathering at Swedish ski resorts, which until Saturday kept their nightlife open. The virus has previously spread easily in mountain resorts in Austria and Italy. Johan Carlson, head of Sweden's public health agency, last week defended Sweden's approach, saying the country cannot take draconian measures that have a limited impact on the epidemic, but knock out the functions of society. Let's take a look at the COVID map here real quick and see how Sweden's doing. Again, these statistics, official statistics cannot be trusted. It's important to note that in the midst of this crisis, which is being used to justify shutting down the global economy, impoverishing billions of people, while billions were already impoverished, Sweden is one of the few countries that is not completely and utterly losing its shit in response. What do we see in Sweden? Their total number of infections, 3,069, 105 total deaths. We'll see how this plays out, but you can see their spike there. Looks pretty comparable. They have about a 300 increase, so about a 10% increase on the day-to-day from the 25th to the 26th compared to the US, where our rate is 83 to 101. So we've got a higher rate of increase here in the US, according to official figures. about a 20%, 20+% day-on-day increase from the 25th to 26th, compared to Sweden, where they're doing substantially less to limit people's freedoms. In the midst of this, what does it all mean? I don't know. Another thing I don't know is what the actual numbers are, and neither do you, neither does anybody. Why? Because there's no widespread testing out there. The only people, as far as I know, that are getting tested are people that were already in the hospital due to another condition and were tested for COVID. People who exhibited extreme, severe symptoms. Obviously, the vast majority of people who get COVID do not need to be hospitalized. Even people that experience severe reactions to COVID, the vast majority of them are not hospitalized. Approximately 1 in 10 people with a confirmed case are hospitalized. And so the vast majority of people that could have COVID have not been tested for COVID. We don't really know how high the death rate is. We don't really know how many people have been infected. But we sure do know what's going to happen if they continue closing down the economy. So there, Sweden, we'll see what happens in Sweden. In financial news, precious metals news, gold gains 8% and silver 18% in the week as the Fed balance sheet tops $5 trillion. Interestingly, published 2 days ago in The Guardian, former British PM Gordon Brown calls for global government to tackle the coronavirus. Gordon Brown has urged world leaders to create a temporary form of global government to tackle the twin medical and economic crises caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. The former labor minister, who was at the center of the international efforts to tackle the impact of the near meltdown of the banks in 2008, said there was a need for a task force involving world leaders, health experts, and the heads of the international organizations that would have executive powers to coordinate the response. A virtual meeting of the G20 group, developed in developing countries, chaired by Saudi Arabia, human rights violator Saudi Arabia, I might add, where they still behead people, will be held on Thursday. But Brown said it would have been preferable to have also included the UN Security Council. Last paragraph. The World Bank and the IMF need an increase in their financial firepower to cope with the impact of the crisis on low and middle income countries, he said. Of course he said that. Daily Reckoning, James Rickards, get ready for world money. Since Federal Reserve resources were barely able to prevent complete collapse in 2008, it should be expected that an even larger collapse will overwhelm the Fed's balance sheet. That's exactly the situation we're facing now. The specter of a global debt crisis suggests the urgency for new liquidity sources, bigger than those that central banks can provide. The logic leads quickly to one currency for the planet. The task of reliquefying the world will fall on the IMF because the IMF will have the only clean balance sheet left among official institutions. The IMF will rise to the occasion with a towering issuance of special drawing rights, SDRs, and this monetary operation will effectively end the dollar's role as the leading global reserve currency. There you go. Pretty wild, strange days. Interestingly, in the midst of all this, this is coming from Activist Post, heavily censored website. In the midst of all this, there appears to be the rollout of 5G going on simultaneously. El Trumpo just signed a 5G Act pretty recently here. And people are protesting against utility smart meters in France on a similar vein of technocratic globalist surveillance, right? Smart meters not only emit carcinogenic and potentially behavior, health, mental health, physical health, and spiritual health, sleep cycle disrupting wireless electromagnetic frequencies, but they also keep an eye on exactly what you're doing in your own home, exactly what appliances you're running, so on and so forth. And in France, they are protesting this. So I think we should probably stay aware of that. Stay up on this. This I found as an interesting video. I'm going to paste this one in. This guy obviously takes a religious slant on things. E. Michael Jones. It's not letting me paste comments in here today, so I don't know what's up with that. Trying to share that one, but this video worth a watch over at Culture Wars. Fascinating perspective from a religious guy. He brings up a good point in there. He talks about 2001 when the Israeli stormtroopers in Palestine put everybody on house arrest, and they took control of the media. They took control of the TV stations serving Palestine. And you know what they did? They broadcast pornography 24 hours a day on every channel the Palestinians had access to. So, you know, aside from internet, their source of news, TV news, people locked into their homes, and the only thing they could find on TV was pornography. In the midst of this situation, the COVID situation, bars are closed, restaurants are closed, hotels are closed, the entire economy shut down. And another thing that has been closed is churches. At the same time, Pornhub is offering free pornography streaming live into your home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What does it all mean? I don't know, but I do know pornog, not very good for you. John Rappaport's blog, interesting comments there on his blog. I thought that was a fun little read. If you want to check it out, go for it. And this is interesting too, published 2 days ago. Again, I talked about the ventilator situation a little earlier. You know, we're being led to believe that we need to shut down the global economy so healthcare providers have enough time to get their hands on masks and beds and ventilators. There's no mention about how effective supplemental oxygen tanks could be. Oxygen tanks, obviously, very readily available. Tanks that can store compressed gases, which can easily be filled with oxygen and administered to patients. Seems like a pretty logical thing for hospitals to be doing. But instead, we're being told that we need, we got to just put everything on hold while we build, thousands and thousands and thousands of ventilator machines. And in New York, they're trying out putting 2 patients on 1 ventilator. At least one New York hospital has begun putting 2 patients on a single ventilator machine in experimental crisis mode protocols some doctors worry is too risky, but others deem necessary as the coronavirus outbreak strains medical resources. Bear in mind, these same medical resources are getting a $100 billion bailout. The coronavirus causes a respiratory illness called COVID-19 that in severe cases can ravage the lungs. It has killed at least 281 people over a few weeks in New York City, which is struggling with one of the largest caseloads in the world at nearly 22,000 confirmed cases. Obviously, that number's gone up in the last couple of days. Interesting to note here, Columbia University study in 2006, researchers using lung simulators concluded that a single ventilator could sustain 4 adults in an emergency scenario. So add that to good news too. It's the kind of information that our beloved healthcare providers should be made aware of. Again, this is only my personal opinion. I think I've done a pretty good job of supporting it in this broadcast. The impact of poverty, the impact of hunger, the impact of a crashed global economy, and the impact of the stress and fear that is arising due to this situation will far exceed the number of deaths caused by the coronavirus itself. Prove me wrong, please. I would love to be wrong on this one. Right now, what does it look like? It looks like a classic Hegelian dialectic where the little globalist troll is leading the band with his coronavirus wand. The mainstream media, government agencies blaring out an incessant trumpet sound of fear. And who's carrying the big bass drum of solution? Well, that would be the military-industrial complex. So, what do we got to do? Well, there's never been a better time to take care of your own personal health. That's for sure. In the midst of all this, let me see if I got the book here. 1 second. There it is. Never let a good crisis go to waste is the fundamental philosophy of the disaster capitalists. Naomi Klein's shock doctrine, a book more relevant now than ever before. It plays out over and over and over again. Create the problem, manipulate the problem, manipulate the public's reaction to the problem, and then you get them to call for the solution that you originally wanted. It's the oldest trick in the book. It's been used by rulers for thousands of years to gain control over the minds and lives of billions of people throughout human history. And I'm getting pretty tired of it myself. It seems like a pretty tired script. It seems like a pretty BS way to run a planet. I'd love to get your thoughts. Let's see what we got going on here in the comments. Ron Youngblood coming from Illinois. What's up? Everybody, great comments in there. I'm having trouble with BeLive sharing comments, although I did figure out why my computer was glitching out so hard. Just so you know, in case you're trying to live stream, it was a third-party app which was opening up and taking control of my camera and clogging up my entire computer system. So we're back live here at Wake Up Wyoming. Thank you all for tuning in. I'll be going live for you quite regularly in the midst of this situation. Please share this broadcast. Please let people know about the Fujifilm Japanese drug Avajan, which appears to be a successful treatment for COVID. Again, I'm not giving medical advice. I'm just reading mainstream news headlines here. Let's expose the French government, which appears to be suppressing the availability of another treatment that appears to be successful in dealing with COVID. Let's keep exposing the fear mongers. Let's all remember that the mainstream media is specifically designed by the corporations, the handful of uber powerful, uber wealthy corporations which control the mainstream media has specifically designed it largely to distract us. That's why 99% of what you see in the media is entertainment with literally zero educational value. It's designed to divide us, which is why we always see this rich versus poor, old versus young, Republicans versus Democrats, conservatives versus liberals, black versus white, gay versus straight, pro-life versus pro-choice agenda perpetually being pushed. One thing I find interesting is the mainstream media never talks about, never even expresses an anti-war stance, right? Poverty kills a lot of people. War kills a lot of people. And it's important to note that governments also kill a lot of people. We're being led to believe by this Decepticon media that the same government which steals 25 to 35% of our income, which wages an endless war of terror all over the world, which goes around bulldozing peaceful prayer encampments that were specifically designed, built to protect public health. We're being led to believe that these same organizations, this same government cares so much about the health and well-being of the elderly and infirm that they just have to close down the global economy because it's the only way we're going to save ourselves from certain death due to COVID. The whole situation smells a lot like the climate change agenda, doesn't it? But here it is in real time unfolding before our eyes. Let's see, mainstream media designed to deceive. What else did I miss there? Distract, divide, deceive, endless lies. Depress, right? And arguably spread a whole lot of fear. So take it all with a grain of salt, my friends. Take me with a grain of salt. Take all this information with a grain of salt because there aren't too many trustworthy sources out there. I'm doing the best I can, but hey, I gotta, who do I cite? The mainstream media. Is the mainstream media full of shit? Absolutely. My old boss, Mike Rupert, said, you got to separate the ice cream from the bullshit. I'm trying to find those little nuggets of truth amidst all the fear. The point of this broadcast, not to spread fear, but a little hope, a lot of awareness, and just trying to share some information. So everybody, thank you for tuning in. I'm signing off for now. Take care of yourselves and the ones you love. I'll be back again real soon here at Wake Up News, unless they shut us down like they shut down so many other independent media pages in recent years. Take care. One love. Peace.